Hey everybody, this is Autoblog podcast producer Eric here. I'm just hopping in quickly at the beginning of the episode to let you know that this episode of the Autoblog podcast is brought to you by the SoFi Daily podcast. Reaching financial independence starts with having the right information. So every weekday morning, SoFi keeps you up to date with important business news and stock market happenings and how they affect your financial life. So get your money right and search for SoFi, that's SOFI, wherever you get your podcasts. On with the show.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Autoblog podcast. I'm Greg Migliore. Joining me today is Associate Editor Byron Hurd, who is fresh off some time in the 2021 Ford Bronco. It's going to be pretty awesome. I can't wait to hear what that was all about. How you doing, man?
I'm doing pretty good. I've been in Ford mode the last couple weeks, so got lots to talk about. It's going to be fun.
You're thinking Ford first, second, and apparently always, according to the assignments. It's funny because, like, when I pass out assignments, I don't always think that way, but then somebody will be like, Greg, you've sent me on 3 straight BMW trips. Is there a reason for that? And a lot of times it's like, well, I just knew you were going to, like, you'd been to that part of wherever lately. And this is more like when we could travel. But so, yeah, our Ford Bureau Chief, Byron Hurd. Yeah, so we have a great show for you. We are going to talk Bronco. That's going to be cool. We do have another, this is ironic, Ford Roush Mustang that Byron spent some time in. I haven't driven this one, obviously, but I have driven Roush Mustangs. I always think they're interesting. I've been to the facility out there in Livonia, Michigan. They actually have a couple of them, but it's a cool place. I've met Jack Roush. He's a cool dude. So yeah, they'll get through some news, the auto industry in Q2, how sales and some other trends. We'll break those down. Joe Biden maybe just revealed an electric Corvette. This was a couple of weeks ago. General Motors clammed up pretty quick on that, and the Biden campaign has not really amplified the electric Corvette. They've had some other things to do. But hey, that's cool. Let's talk about it, because I really think an electric Corvette would be a great idea. Now, we also, just to be clear, we don't know the context. You could have been talking about the Genovation Corvette or just the idea of one, but we're going to explain more. So there's a teaser for you, if you will. And then we're also lastly going to talk about used cars. And though we don't have to spend my money, we do have to spend Byron's money. Sort of, well, I guess he was receiving money on this one. We have a car sale. We have a transaction. So we'll talk about that. But yeah, I think another good note for this podcast is Byron and I both have haircuts for the first time in quite some time.
Yeah.
You went to get yours, I assume? How'd it go?
I did. Yeah, I think they're still actually vacuuming up the hair that they had to chop off my head, because I had not been to a barber or whatever since February, probably. And yeah, it was getting dire. I've posted a few videos lately. If anyone's seen me in some Autoblog videos over the past month or two, you know how bad it was getting. So yeah, got that all dealt with. But you did yours yourself, didn't you?
I did. It was quite gratifying. I had ordered Phillips and Norelco, just clippers. It was just very simply like, what's the one the guy in the YouTube video is using? What's the highest rated thing on Amazon or Target, wherever I got it? And I went with that. And then literally last Friday, I was bored. I'm like, I need to do this. I can keep looking at different hair cutting diagrams, or let's just see what happens. So I did it. And not to toot my own horn, I'm more proud of the fact that I did it, but it looks okay. I was like,
Yeah.
wow, I could teach myself to cut my hair here. So
Yeah, I mean, I can see you on this feed, and if you hadn't told us you'd done it yourself, wouldn't have had a clue.
Why, thank you. Why, thank you. It was fun in some ways, and now I have this fancy set of clippers, and because it's like, you know, we're still in the like sort of work from home period. Like, there's no real reason to do a big shave, if you will. But I could bust out the clippers, trim up the beard, and I look at least like a little cleaned up, you know, as opposed to like, well, I want to go shave, but I have 3 minutes just to go bzz, 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 and hey, you look more like you need to shave, as opposed to like, Greg, you're looking a little rough there. So
yeah, you've gone feral.
So anyways, that's our grooming habits. Let's talk about the Bronco. You were out at it's an off-road park, right?
Yeah, Hollyoaks. It's new. I don't believe it's actually even open to the public yet. They were slated to open, I think, in the spring or maybe early summer, and with everything going on in the world, didn't really come together. But Ford was able to get some space over there to show off the new 2021 Bronco and Bronco Sport. We did not get to actually drive them, but we did get to ride in both and on some pretty impressive trails, and really got to see them get worked out a little bit. And we got to spend some time with a couple of concepts, kind of in the Easter Jeep Safari theme, like that kind of a thing. So they were just Broncos dressed up with accessories and what have you. So it was quite an experience.
What was your take just on riding in the new Bronco?
It's the real deal.
Okay.
It's very much the real deal. I got to sit in the two-door with the it was a Badlands model, so the equivalent of a Rubicon, effectively, if you know your Jeeps. And it had the manual transmission, which was really cool to see in action, and it was genuinely impressive. And I say this as a Wrangler owner, someone who's done plenty of off-roading. The way the development engineer who was driving was just hammering the thing around, to the complete confidence he had in this development mule that's probably just been beat on for its entire life. He was flinging it through the ruts like they didn't even exist. And I'll have to give them credit. The independent front suspension, the comfort level is really impressive. And it's not something you think about when it comes to like an actual dedicated off-road vehicle. Comfort is not even in the top 5 when it comes to the way the suspension's engineered. So when you figure that this was a Badlands model that's meant to be the hardcore rock crawling, sand digging, do anything model, it was not nearly as punishing as any other serious off-roader I've been in at any point in recent memory. It was, I'm not going to call it comfortable because that's just not the right word, but it was more pleasant than I expected. We'll put it that way.
So as a Wrangler owner, I'm curious how, and I've driven a million Wranglers, and I'm always kind of like, for what this is kind of what it is. Like, this is the option. 4Runner is a little bit different. Land Cruiser, blah, blah, blah. There's other things out there that are like larger or a little bit different. For just like the purpose, like spec, what you need it to be, the Wrangler to me is like almost a singular thing. Did the Bronco change your mind at all? Like, if you were in the market, would you be like, I don't know, maybe I like this better than the Wrangler? Where do you land?
Oh, man. Well, I mean, to be honest, if I hadn't been looking down at any point, I would have told you I was in a Wrangler. It had that same kind of feeling, like where it was still, it's built to do a job, and it's built to do it well. And with all the comfort and everything being secondary to that, it felt like it had that same singularity of purpose that the Jeep does. So it was absolutely the quintessential modern off-road experience. And the fact that Ford came from having basically nothing to producing a very convincing Jeep alternative is just incredibly impressive.
I will admit the styling, I think, actually is more appealing than the Wrangler. And I really like the Wrangler, but just this whole like retro look, the retro look, when I look back at like, what the Bronco has been over its history, it's cool. And it's like a really nice, like modern take, because it's not syrupy retro. It's like, this is kind of like what I think the Bronco would have evolved to had they kept it in, production, if you will. I think they would have found a way to get back to this look. So there is a cool, wow, gee whiz factor that the Wrangler does not have right now. So, I always go back to the Gladiator comparison that I sort of make. I was so fired up about that thing. I wanted one. I was ready to go buy one, even though I didn't need a car. But then I drove the Gladiator and I was like, okay, that's great. That's fine. There we go. And then I started driving more Wranglers again. They just kept coming through the press fleet. I'm like, these are good, blah, blah, blah. And I just found myself thinking, I actually like the Wrangler more. Just the SUV fits my lifestyle more. I don't really need a truck. I like the cargo area in back. I like the overall look of it. I don't know, there's something about the way the Gladiator is kind of like, bopped up, if you will, and like its off-road spec that I think is a little more of an awkward look, whereas the Wrangler is just it's just that boxy, sort of silhouette that you can't really translate to anything else. So I'm kind of wondering if I did drive the Bronco, if I would sort of come home to the Wrangler as far as my favorite off-roader. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough call. I mean, obviously I haven't had a chance to actually drive the new Bronco yet.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I mean, we say it a lot just because, technology's come a long way and manufacturers have really caught up to each other. There aren't really any bad cars, right? But there's usually a winner and a loser no matter how you look at it. And I'm genuinely curious to see if there is any way in which the Bronco really falls short of the Wrangler, because from everything I've seen and the experience I've had so far, I don't know where that shortcoming would be. If they don't have them beat, they at least have them matched, and that's a feat in and of itself. So yeah. I've yet to see anything that concerns me. So
here's another interesting thing. When you're trying to steal market share, usually you have to be better. In this case, I sort of feel like matching the Wrangler, like what you just said, is enough, because there's going to be people who maybe get the Wrangler because, like what I said, it's really the only answer. If you're looking for that exact, experience, off-road, the iconic looks, well, now there's another answer to that question. So it's okay, maybe I just like how the Bronco looks, or maybe I like the things I could get on these different trims that are a little bit different. Oh, hey, it's a little bit newer because Ford just developed it. Whereas the Wrangler inevitably kind of looks old. It always does. They don't redesign it all that much. And we'll see, competition generally breeds, better things. So maybe the Jeep gets better too. We see some more options or more firepower under the hood. I was impressed when the Bronco outgunned the Wrangler on a bunch of different fronts, which off-road doesn't matter, but when you consider that these things are going to basically cruise around suburbia a lot, well, okay, a little extra horsepower is kind of a good thing, Yeah. So any other takeaways? Yeah. To be clear, you rode in the Bronco. I might be saying drive here. Byron rode in it, but you drove in the regular Bronco. What did you ride in? 2-door, 4-door?
It was a 2-door. They only had 2-door big Broncos, and then they also had the Sport that we rode in as well. And so the courses that they used for the two were different. The Sport did not go through the articulation course or the breakover course, which were measured out to accommodate Broncos, the real Bronco. And we did different water fording trails in each because the Bronco Sport has about a foot less water fording depth than the regular Bronco. So yeah, I've got some video, first-person perspective video in the 2-door Bronco, so check that out. That's worth a look if you want to get a feel for how gnarly the course was.
I can't wait. I am super jealous. I cannot wait to see this, what this is all about. I actually saw the Bronco 2 years ago, at least, more than 2 years ago, at this sort of Ford event. And then we were under embargo for basically forever. It was funny. We could basically never talk about it. But now that it's out, I think I can say that I saw it back then. And it's definitely been a thing that I was really excited about and really just thought, you hope economic conditions continue, to make it so the auto industry, as an entity, can keep making these interesting vehicles. And we don't have to go back to the recession, the Great Recession, where literally our coverage wasn't, hey, there's a new car. It was, hey, this brand is dying. This brand is closing. This sports car that we loved but was a niche model is being, killed off. This is a way better narrative. So, who knows? The economy's it's pretty choppy. So who knows? But I mean, hopefully this bodes well for the future.
Yeah, and I think it really helps that the Bronco was really a passion project for the guys who put it together. Guys is the wrong word. The men and women who put it together really cared about it, and they consulted with enthusiasts. A lot of them are enthusiasts. Some of them I actually learned from Paul Wraith yesterday that there are actual vintage Bronco owners on staff with that team. A lot of the development drivers and engineers are Wrangler owners are, or soon to be were, Wrangler owners, since they'll have Bronco options now. But I mean, it really is something that was put together from day one to be an iconic revival, and the energy they put into it and the enthusiasm, the genuine enthusiasm from the people involved, I think it pushed over any like economic concerns with getting the car out the door. So I don't think Ford's going to have any regrets in that department.
What do you think of the Bronco Sport? I feel like this is going to be like, I don't know, like a meme almost. We're going to like every single thing. It's going to be like Bronco, Bronco, Bronco. Then, oh, by the way, Byron also rode in the Bronco Sport. You know, we did this like, I think with Riswick, who was covering this. And we talked all about the Bronco. And he was like, by the way, the Bronco Sport's pretty cool. And like, then we talked about it. So just, you know, what's your like thumbnail, you know, shot in the beer of the Bronco Sport?
I mean, it's all about keeping it in context. I mean, if you obviously can't compare it directly to the actual Bronco or four-door. They're completely different cars and they have completely different purposes. But for what it is, I mean, the grades that we tackled going uphill were identical on both of the routes we took. They overlapped, so that we were climbing up and down the same hills. And the Sport did an amazing job. So, you know, it's proof that with a decent all-wheel drive system, which it has, and a well-specified set of tires, and it was also a Badlands model, so it had the Falcon Wild Peak tires on it. It's an incredibly capable car for what it is. It's just, you know, it's about setting expectations. You go in knowing that, you know, if you're getting the Bronco Sport, you want something that's a little more of an all-rounder with a rough edge to it, or you want the Bronco because you only care about capability and everything else lags behind it.
Cool. Did you get to do any vintage Broncoing?
I did. They had a 74, so it was a 302 model with the 4-speed or 3-speed, can't remember, automatic. And got to take it on a much less hardcore trail around the park. It was kind of just a leisurely tour. I mean, you know, 4-wheel drum brakes. You don't want to go flying off the cliff or anything like that. But it really brought back memories because the last time I'd driven an original Bronco was back in the early aughts, probably like 2002, 2003, not long after I got my driver's license. And my grandmother had one, and so she had a 77 Ranger package, so same engine, same transmission that was in this one. And so it was kind of like instant nostalgia for me just getting behind the wheel of that thing. But it's very clear how far we've come building off-road cars, because that thing is it's an experience, especially once you get on the rutted parts. So it was a nice little memory brought back, but a nice reminder of how far we've come too.
It's funny, I was at the Ford Christmas party last year, and you know, I don't think it's a big secret that car companies like to do little happy hours and Christmas parties, holiday parties, whatnot for the journalists in town. Good way to, like, you know, talk to the communications people and some of the executives. And the guy in line in front of me, the valet, was Jim Farley, who rolled up in his vintage Bronco, or had his vintage Bronco. And they brought it around, and I was like, well, that's pretty cool. And it was like one of those like really nasty like December days in Michigan, late November, where it's like 32 degrees and kind of raining, but kind of snowing. You know, it was just enough that I was like, it's going to be a little, you know, kind of a slick ride home. And then I saw his Bronco and the tires that were on it. I was like, he's not going to have any problem, you know? And I don't remember all the details, but I feel like the valet got to drive it up. And I was like, dude, that guy's so lucky. He just gets to drive, like, I don't know what year he has, but I feel like it's a 66.
Okay.
And it was cool. And I've met Jim Farley a few times. You know, doing this job for a while, you interview a lot of executives, things like that. And, you know, you always know he's an enthusiast, but that's like an enthusiast move right there, is in the middle of like winter or the start of winter, bust out your vintage Bronco and commute home in it. I don't know. I think he's going to be a good CEO too. As I randomly just kind of riff here, I think he's going to be good. I think he's going to bring a passion to Ford. I think he understands and gets the deep meaning that the company means to some people. You know, his grandfather worked there back in 1918. I think he's a very real guy too. At least I think so. As much as you know anybody in this business, right? And I think
Right.
you don't fake stuff like that. I think you're like, hey, you do this job because it means something to you. Just like our jobs mean something to you. It's definitely more than like, the cars and stuff. It's about the cars and communicating to people and all that stuff. And I'm going off on a tangent, but yeah, he had a cool Bronco. He drove it home, and I think he's going to be an interesting CEO. Do you have any thoughts on any of that little random rant?
No, I mean, I'd love to be in his position. I'd love to be able to just do that. Like, I've got my Wrangler, I've got my Miata, and they each have their own purpose. But at some point, I'd like to start collecting the things that I like to look at. So,
And you don't have your Challenger, which we'll get to in a little bit. So,
yes.
Any other Bronco thoughts before we move on to one more Ford thing?
No, I think that's all I've got on Bronco.
How about the Roush Mustang? I have not driven a Roush Mustang in quite some time. When I did, I was impressed with it. But this is like a couple Mustang generations ago. You got to drive the new one. You went to their facility. Did you go to the one in Livonia? That's my first question.
The one I went to was in Plymouth.
Okay, all right. So when I drove one, I went to the one in Livonia, which was their tech center. It may not even be that anymore. And just for everybody listening, these are just different Detroit suburbs where there's a lot of car facilities. And it was also where like their performance headquarters were. And I think like some of the motorsports operations were there. But I obviously, you went to the one in Plymouth. Nobody cares about where these are. How was the car?
It was, honestly, I was impressed by two things. First of all, it was their development prototype for the Jack Roush edition. So this is above and beyond a regular Stage 3 Roush Mustang. So with the Stage 3, you get 750 horsepower, and they rework the suspension, you get some cooling upgrades. With the Jack Roush edition, you get another 25 horsepower on top of that, so it's 775 they use a different supercharger altogether, it's not just tuning. And then they also add in an adaptive rear spoiler, and active exhaust and some other little goodies here and there. Plus you get, because it's a Jack Roush signature edition, you get his signature like handwritten all over half the car and stuff like that. So it's a very limited run model. It's really impressive how approachable this thing is. When you're talking about a car with 775 horsepower, regardless of who built it, that's an intimidating figure. And then when you combine that with the fact that you're talking about, a car that was engineered from the factory to have 450-ish horsepower, now having this extra, 300 stacked on top of that. When it comes to these kinds of aftermarket applications, you sometimes get some basket cases. And obviously a name like Roush is not going to throw out something that's just, completely half-cocked. But you always wonder, like, okay, the factory formula was good, they messed with it, is it still going to feel like a factory car? And this, I think, partly because supercharging is always more forgiving than turbocharging, especially when you're talking about big power. This car is just amazingly approachable. You can get in it and drive it around like any other V8 Mustang. It is docile until you want it to be crazy, because you really have to go deep in the throttle to get a supercharger to wake the car up. And once you do, man, lightning speeds. It's the sound it makes is incredible. You get that initial kind of whoosh and then the whine, and then suddenly you're, hyperspeed. And it's linear and it feels natural. You never lose that feeling that where your foot is on the pedal is what the engine is doing. So I have to give them a lot of credit, the way they applied these upgrades to this, just, garden variety. You have to buy an off-the-shelf Mustang in order to do this. Just, the suspension tuning that they did, the cooling upgrades that they did are critical to keeping all this under control, but it's tuned so beautifully that you wouldn't even know anything was going on until you really open it up. And I found that really impressive.
It's interesting to kind of go back to something you said about how tricky it is to mess with a stock car that's already very good. I drove a Celine Mustang. This was, probably 7-8 years ago. And this was, I would say, clearly it was like they shouldn't have messed with the stock car, if you will. This was a version of Celine, like after Steve Celine had sort of left the company. And this was, I honestly don't even know what the current status of Celine is, to be perfectly honest. But this was whatever it was back in 2011 or 12. I think it had some like local Detroit investors had bought into it for a while. I'm sure it's gone through a couple iterations since. Funny note, the investors in that car, I think, or that Celine brand at the time, were also sort of rumored to be trying to buy the Viper brand, which FCA was like, yeah, we're not going to sell that. Anyways, that's my footnotes of history. But yeah, it's tricky. You don't want to like take something that's already good, already probably optimized by the factory, and like mess with it. You know, like it's just like what are you doing? You don't think the Ford suspension engineers did everything they could to get this right? But brands like Roush, who obviously have a very close relationship with the factory, they do tend to like attention to detail, because if they don't, no one's going to take them seriously and no one's going to buy one.
Yeah, Roush got access to the control system for the Magna-Ride suspension on this too. So a lot of the tuning that they did wasn't even actually hardware. It was just recalibration of the response in the system. So it's a wonderful package, and I owned a 2015 Mustang GT with the regular performance package at the time, and I would much rather drive this Roush Stage 3 Plus, if you will, daily than I would have my 2015. It's just, it's still a very easy to drive, approachable car. And I mean, honestly, if you don't get it, it's actually, I'm looking at it, stylistically, it's not all that wild. Like, you could actually get one of these in a fairly subdued color, and you'd be practically invisible in Metro Detroit, where every third person's driving a Mustang anyway. So
that's cool. And you can get these at the dealer? Is that how you get one of these things?
So I think you have to go through Roush in order to make the purchase, because essentially what you're doing is like you're setting them up so then you have your car that you purchase separately delivered to them, and they perform the upgrades on it.
Rock and roll.
So
sounds good. Yeah, another Mustang with a slightly different flavor. I think that to me is like really at the core of what some of these like sort of tuner brands do. Is it's tough to improve them, as we've sort of belabored at this point. But if you could give it a different flavor, make it so maybe you like this, like you like, I don't know, you like vanilla ice cream, but mint chocolate chip is good at some points, and so I don't know. That's kind of cool. I think I always like variety when it comes to the automotive space. So very cool. Any other Roush thoughts?
That's all I've got on the Roush.
Let's talk about some news then. The auto industry had an up and down Q2. Primarily down, just when you look at sales and things like that. There were like a few bright spots, but you pulled together kind of a roundup earlier this month. But we are seeing some signs of improvement, flickering, if you will, anyway. Just kind of walk us through this and, let everybody know what's up.
Yeah, it looked like the best news really was fairly universal, and that was retail is recovering pretty nicely. Like in the places where you can go to a dealership and purchase a car, people are doing that, which is good news. The downside to that is fleet is not doing well. Fortunately, most of the major automakers playing in the U.S. industry anyway have kind of backed away on fleet sales and have been doing so for the past decade, it feels like. But every year they're selling incrementally fewer, especially to rental fleets. So really the company that had the worst news on that front was Nissan, which appears to, among many other problems, still be dumping a lot of vehicles into fleet channels. And without those opportunities, their numbers were down a lot more than just about anybody else's. But the good news is that the inventories are starting to be built back up because production's restarted just about everywhere, at least to some degree. Maybe not 100% capacity, but a decent amount. So inventory is coming back. The deals will start to come back, and hopefully floodgates will open up a little bit later in the year here as we kind of figure out the new normal.
Yeah, I mean, what is the new normal? Is like, if you try to look at some of these economic indicators, it's really confusing. At the end of the day, people, if they have jobs, are going to want to buy cars. So, I mean, the industry though has a lot of different, I think as any economist, not any, but many economists would tell you, it's not one big silver bullet. It's like you take the lever and you push like 3 or 4 of them a little bit down, as opposed to pushing them all down, like all the way, which is actually a line from The West Wing. Martin Sheen talks about that. He's the president. Maybe we'll get to that a little bit later. But for those of you listening, Byron and I and senior producer Chris McGraw are sort of big West Wing fans. So we won't belabor that right now, but maybe we'll get to that a little bit, have a little fun there. But I don't know about you, Byron, I find myself working subconsciously West Wing, like thoughts and phrases, just they come out. And I'm like, oh, wow, that's exactly like, that's not me, that's Aaron Sorkin. And I'm like, whoops, that's John Spencer or Martin Sheen. And I'm like, okay. But I digress. That's where that whole like thought process on the economy came from. Cool. Let's move along. Speaking of the West Wing, Joe Biden, who is running for president, as you may have heard, put out a campaign ad on Twitter, and it was him and his, I believe it's a 67 Corvette, if I remember right, and beautiful car, green. It's him driving it. It's reminiscent of that, like Jay Leno's Garage, I think he did a few years back. And just he kind of puts a line in there about like, and yeah, I can't wait for the electric Corvette or something to that effect. And, you know, that immediately made like Twitter go crazy and everything else go crazy. People are like, well, what does he mean? Does he have some insider tips? And it's entirely possible that he could be the next president. He was, very involved in the bailout of, Ford, General Motors, and just the economic recovery 10 years ago. It's possible he knows something. It's also possible he's just saying something. It's possible somebody said, hey, there's a cool electric Corvette out there from this company called Genovation. Maybe that's what he was referring to. So I don't know. I love the conspiracy theories. I think they're going to do an electric Corvette, at least a hybrid at some point. What do you think?
Well, I mean, they've got the trademark on the E-Ray name, Corvette E-Ray. So obviously that is something. And if you stick E on anything, people are going to assume it means electric. So, GM knew what it was doing when it filed for that. How far out we are on that and what kind of guarantees a company would be trying to make this far out are kind of up in the air. I mean, we've seen mules of what could be plug-in hybrid Corvettes testing. We actually don't have any confirmation that's what they were, but we've seen it circulating and the rumors have followed it. So the chances that a company that wants to go all electric within the next, decade and a half is not working on an electric version of its Halo car, zero. So there's no way we won't see that. What shape it'll take, especially initially, I don't know. I mean, I feel like a hybrid makes the most sense, especially because that's a blueprint that already exists for high performance vehicles. We're in the second and third generation of some like high performance plug-in hybrids. So I mean, that seems like the right route to go down. Whether there'll be pressure from within GM to go all electric instead to kind of lead the charge, if you will, on that idea, we'll see. But it really feels like for now that Cadillac is kind of taking on that role, and I don't know that Corvette would be an ideal platform for it.
I asked Tej Yuchter, who's the sort of Corvette guru, the chief engineer, one time at a studio in Detroit. We were actually both recording a local show, Autoline. I'll go ahead and plug it. It was cool. And this was pre-pandemic, obviously, when we could do things in person. And I just kind of asked him that once on camera. And I forget if I actually followed up, but he totally was like, I don't think he said 100% no, but it was just a total like, we're not going to go there right now. We're not going to tease it out. Like, stay tuned. We're not going to shut it down forever. But to me, they seem to very obviously want to focus on like the current car for at least a couple of years. I think it makes a ton of sense to do one from a pure performance perspective. I love the idea of making the Corvette like an electric, a hybrid electric, some sort of like really exotic. It's got that mid-engine layout. But obviously, Tej didn't go into much of any other comments on that. I don't know how the layout could accommodate that. That's where you got to like maybe really, get into like some chassis engineer or somebody who could really say, well, we could set it up this way with like the motors here and the batteries here, and this is how it would work with the V8 or maybe they do a V6. I don't know. This is how it would work as an all electric. I don't know if that's even practical. So I don't know. I love that as a thought exercise. We can talk about it just because of this like random campaign ad, but I mean, we don't really have anything new to share, obviously.
Right.
So, cool. We actually did put a request into the Biden camp to try and get some more info. So, hey, we'd love to. We haven't heard back lately, but hey, if they have any future Corvette product plans, that would be amazing. So that's the potential electric Corvette. I'll leave just kind of a teaser there, if you will. And yeah, let's talk used cars. You just sold your Challenger, which
Yes.
is great. Congratulations. Not that you want to get rid of your Challenger, but it's like you were done with that. You have other cars. You have press cars. It was time to move on from this. And you managed to do it in the middle of a pandemic, which is not a small thing. Feels pretty good, I would imagine, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I wasn't really planning on selling it, actually. I had teased the idea before I moved to Detroit, which, for those who don't know, I just did a few months ago, and decided to keep it, and had a nice big garage. Was, not in any kind of hurry to downsize my fleet. And just a couple weeks ago, a friend tipped me off that Carvana was giving really good offers on cars. So I went through their little tool, plugged it in, came back with an offer that was basically just about what I paid for it a few years ago. So in my mind, when somebody offers you as much money as you spent on a car that you could easily replace, you take it. You take it. It's crazy not to. Unless you have some sort of particular sentimental attachment to it. There's no reason not to, because if you can always get another one, So I took the deal. It was a painless process, and I've been hearing from other people too that it isn't just isolated to that particular vendor. There's a dearth of inventory of used cars right now, both because people haven't been going to dealerships and trading in their old ones, and because people aren't turning in leases, and for many, many, many reasons, there's just very low inventory outside of what's being dumped onto the market by companies like Hertz, which are struggling financially and need to reduce their rental fleets. So people that are selling used cars need to buy used cars, so the offers are good right now. And it sounds like maybe the market's finally saturating a little bit, and the sweet spot might have been over the past few weeks. But if you have a spare car that you've been meaning to sell, or you just haven't gotten around to selling for whatever reason, and believe me, people have plenty of good reasons right now, this might be a moment. Strike while the iron's hot, especially if it's something relatively late model with relatively few miles that would be attractive, like to a dealer that wants to turn around and resell it. You could even try just going into your dealership or calling your dealership if you're not comfortable going in, and just asking them if they'd be interested in buying your car. You might be surprised by the offer they'll give you.
That is very cool. I'll give you a plug to the Autoblog cars for sale listings, because sort of indirectly, you guys probably don't need to know this, but Byron sold his car through Carvana, which essentially can be listed through one of our sort of listings that you can find on Autoblog. There's a couple bells and whistles to get through it. So who knows, maybe an Autoblog reader will find your Challenger, and that'd be kind of cool. Do check out the cars for sale. I was looking at Chevelles the other day on there. There was a 74 that I had my eye on. I actually own a 73 at this moment, sort of. That, yeah, so I don't need a third or a second car, and I actually own a Charger. So I definitely don't need a third car in addition to the family SUV. So yeah, there's a lot going on here at the Migliore household as far as cars. But I mean, it's really interesting right now when you look at the used car marketplace, just the pricing, the accessibility, the ways that people, you could say, hey, I need to get rid of this extra car. This is a way I could do it. Call up your local dealer, call up, there's a bunch of websites, obviously, that can sort of take them off your hands. And it's a little bit different than just, hey, I'm going to throw it up on Facebook or Craigslist and see what happens. The actual used car market, is out there, and it's robust.
Yeah, and right now they're just thirsty. I mean, it's good for people who are in a position to unload a car. It's not as good for people who might need to purchase a used car, because the scarcity of inventory means prices are going to be higher. But I would also encourage you, if you're in that position, to look at private party, because that market has probably not moved the same way that the retail market has.
For sure.
At least not quite as strongly.
All right. So Byron is freed of his Challenger. And that's about all the time we have. Please send us your Spend My Monies. We don't have any. So what we've been doing with the shows is all sorts of different things. Trivias, historical moments. I guess we're both watching The West Wing at different points. Here's my question for you, Byron. We already talked about this on Slack, but I'd like to hear it again. I'm at the end of season 4. This is sort of the end of the, really iconic West Wing episodes. Sam Seaborn is about to get written off. Do I turn back and go back to season 1 and just kind of revel in that escapism, nostalgia? Because to me, some of those seasons or those first episodes look like episodes of a show from the 50s. They're just so I think it was shot in lower resolution, whereas the later seasons were just more modern television. So I don't know, man. Do I turn back or do I power through? I'm not going to go to 7 because literally it was an emotional experience when I concluded my first run of it. Do I keep going and maybe turn back at 5? I don't know. What should I do?
I wouldn't keep going if you're going to turn back after 5, because 5, it's the worst season of that show by far. It's just the first half of it, they didn't know what they were trying to do. And then the second half of it, they finally had some good ideas, but they kind of banged through them really quickly and blew a lot of opportunities. And then they just starting to look ahead, and they came up with these just terrible, convoluted ideas that never really worked out in a way that satisfied any fans. So no, if you're not going to stick around at least through the end of 6, then I would just make that U-turn and head on back.
It's good advice. I feel like I may go into 5 because I remember actually I watched this the first time binge last year. And now it's my second way through because, hey, there's not a lot of new TV shows. And for a while, there wasn't even sports. I somewhat liked 5 and 6, but I didn't like how, by the end of 6, it wasn't really the West Wing. It was there's all these new characters. The existing characters were all in these different positions. It was so crazy. To me, it reminded me of almost there was talk at the time of them almost turning it into a Law and Order with a new administration, same premise of the show, but a new cast. It was you could sort of see them trying to set that up. I don't know how realistic that ever was, but yeah, I think I'm going to probably turn back at the end of 4, but we'll see. I don't know. So if you don't want to hear us talk about 20-year-old TV shows, send us your Spend My Monies. Byron, it was cool hanging out with you this week. What's in your driveway now?
My Jeep and my Miata. I got nothing else right now. It's actually kind of refreshing.
All right, keep it simple. So that's all the time we have this week. Thanks for hanging out, Byron. Enjoy the rest of summer, everybody. Be safe out there, and we will see you on the other side.